Okay, in today's video, we're going to talk about key aspects to systems thinking. So previously talked about what is systems thinking, systems awareness, and ecosystem thinking. We talked about it as a worldview, way of looking at the world. But now we're going to get a little bit more tactical in terms of how can we understand different dimensions to this? Saying that it's holistic is great, and it helps us kind of define what it is. But to get a bit more clear about how we might go about this and what exactly is a kind of reductionist paradigm or an analytical paradigm, what is a systems one, we can break it out into a few different dimensions. And this is not the only way of structuring systems thinking or thinking in systems. But it is some of the key dimensions to it. So we're just going to briefly look at these, touch upon these now, and then we'll zoom in a bit more in the coming 4 modules. So the first one is around, we've talked about it, it's really foundational, trying to get away from parts and snapshots of the system, the components, to this holistic view of the system. So it really is about seeing not just the trees, but the forest. But we should also remember the systems thinking is about seeing both, really. It's about seeing the parts of the trees and the trees in relation to the forest and the overall forest. So that's what we're trying to do. We can see that each of these we go through to become a better systems thinker, to apply systems thinking in a particular context, is to try and take us from the one on the left and move us towards a view of the system that is more one on the right. So we could think about this in it's a worldview. So we can think about this in almost any context, and it will help us derive new insight by moving away from a partial view, a piecemeal view, little bits and pieces here and there, to a more integrated, holistic view of the system. So we could take health, for example. If we look on the left, we know the kind of pathway we've traveled down with the modern science and the analytical approach there, and we've ended up with this very problem-fixing approach to health. It's not really, well, the one on the left is more holistic, right? It's about well-being and everything that's needed to be a healthy human being, should we say, as opposed to the system we kind of know, which is more about fixing problems. Individual problems are very good at that, but it's not very good at delivering an integrated kind of health and well-being approach. So that's just a quick example of what does it mean to take an analytical approach. What are the results of that, right, in healthcare? Or in others, we'll look at other examples here, education or whatever it is. And what does it mean to look at the world like that? And then what are the results of that? And then from the holistic perspective, in health, how could we really think about the overall well-being of this person in all their different dimensions, the physical, mental health, so on and so forth, and really trying to achieve something that's more like well-being. And that would be a more holistic thing rather than kind of healthcare where we're trying to fix problems. So that's just one dimension to shifting from a partial view to a holistic view. Second one here is around reductionism and emergence. We'll be talking about that. Reductionism is about breaking things down to their individual parts and this kind of hierarchical view of the world. There's this big thing, we break it down to these parts and into these parts and so smaller and smaller parts and get more and more analytical. And trying to shift from that view of the world to an emergent view of the world, which is about how small parts in a decentralized way interact and come together to form new patterns that emerge over time. So that again is a paradigm shift, right? It's a systems thinking way of looking at the world instead of this centralized, hierarchical, reductionist approach. And we think about, just give an example, think about energy or something like this in the reductionist approach, that the kind of linear model we know at the moment, very much centralized. We have these big energy power plants and they're kind of pushed out to substations and then distributed out to individual homes. we could think about a more decentralized networked emergent approach where we have, we're all producers of energy and consumers, and we have a more networked approach, and the actual energy available within a system is actually the aggregation of small parts, of decentralized parts in a networked fashion, all of our homes and so forth, to provide that overall capacity of energy distribution, electricity supply. So those difference between a more centralized, hierarchical, reductionist approach and an emergent decentralized network self-organizing approach. Again, those different paradigms, you could look at almost anything through those different lenses and derive new insight. That's what systems thinking is about. It's about looking at things in a new way to derive new perspectives, new insights, and new ways of innovating, changing, and doing things. So down the bottom right, shifting from a disconnected to a connected worldview, we talked about system thinking as being a relational paradigm. It's looking at things in relation to the broader system they're part of. It's also about interdependence, how things are interdependent with others and that we can't fully separate them. So the analytical approach is about isolating, separating, and studying parts individually to understand their properties and so forth. If we want to understand something like a plant, we go and take it into the lab and we chop it up and we try to understand it by understanding all those little parts to it, the molecular makeup and tissues and organs and so on and so forth. We separate it out. Connected view is very different. It's maybe looking at that plant in the context of the broader network of the ecosystem it forms part of and how it relates to all the other parts. So that's a more networked view of the world, and it again derives very different insights. Shifting our view from the left-hand side to the right-hand side here would again help us become better systems thinkers and think in a more relational way about whatever we're looking at. So finally, down on the bottom left here, we see a linear versus non-linear way of looking at the world. So a reductionist paradigm is grounded in this kind of linear conception. It's one thing causes another thing to happen, and that's very much intuitive to us. We see it all around us. We step on the gas in our car and our car goes a bit faster, and we say, what caused the car to go faster? Well, it was me stepping on the gas. So that's a linear interaction there, for example. But they're also non-linear phenomena. Many of the phenomena in our world are non-linear. And it means that one thing doesn't necessarily cause another. Well, it can. One thing can cause another, but then it can feed back to effect first. But it's not just that one thing causes another. It's just that this thing, this result, may actually emerge out of the interaction of many different things. So in that world, we don't really look for one cause to a thing. We might actually say it's just embedded in a whole network of things, and it's emerging out of many different interactions, that processes are happening in a parallel fashion and in a kind of networked way, instead of always looking for one or two or three kind of variables that are affecting this thing and resulting in its changes. We ask more about what's the overall context, what's the overall network, what's the overall set of interrelationships that this might be emerging out of, and how do things feed back on themselves, right? Feedback loops and so forth. How does this thing, this phenomena emerge out of the dynamics, feedback dynamics within the system? So we'll look at that in a minute as we go through and try to give some examples of these and so forth, so you get a better idea of it. But this was just to help you for us to think about the different dimensions of systems thinking, so that we can get clearer about those and how we might shift our thinking from the left-hand side, this reductionist worldview, to this more holistic worldview. And we'll be jumping into those now in the coming modules.